I must have been 6 years old when I went to my first dinosaur museum. I remember walking in the front door, and they had a T-Rex. I'll be with you in a minute. Tech stuff. I can talk and tech, right? They had a T-Rex there on display, the teeth right there at my level. And scary looking. I mean, I was spooked out. I mean, I'm only 6 or 7. If I did that, would it show up? Hot diggity dog. And I told my mom, I was like, what is that? Because I didn't recognize those big teeth in any animal that was alive. And she said, it's a dinosaur. I was like, oh, I'm glad they're not around. Because I would be snack. And then I said, well, my first question, even as a little kid, where did these come from? Like, why are they gone now? Why aren't they in my backyard? Like, what happened? How'd they get here? Where'd they go? I wanted to know. So my mom said, well, let's ask, because she didn't claim any expertise in dinos. Let's ask the museum lady. And so we went to find a docent. It's a museum volunteer. And she said, dinosaurs, we know that they existed from the fossils. And she said a fossil is a rock that's in the shape of the bone. The original bone is long gone, replaced by minerals over a long, slow process that took millions of years. And they've been buried underground for millions of years. And so I got my first indoctrination into millions of years at age 6 or 7 or so. And so I grew up under that impression, as you know by now, until I had to undergo this creation conversion, and I went from evolution to creation because of the science. For me, I had to know that the science, supported Scripture, and I found out that it did in all these different areas, including dinosaurs. And then I look back on it after my conversion. I was like, what helped me was 5 dinosaur details that no one ever told me when I was a kid. The museum docent should have known these 5 dinosaur details because they're actual details that we get from the fossils themselves, not from stories that we approve of and want to tell. So I wish I knew these 5 dinosaur details when I was a kid, because then I wouldn't have spent so many years of my life, running around as though I wasn't created, running around pretending like my life is my own, like I wasn't bought with a price by the Lord Jesus Christ, running around and doing things my way and messing it all up. I wish I'd have known these 5 dinosaur details so I could have thought, okay, this matches the Bible. And that's where these details led me. But just as an overview, this is our mission statement. We have 3 areas that we want to do ministry. One is to enhance worship. We've already tried to do that by elevating the name of the Lord Jesus Christ as creator, just like Scripture teaches. His genius is why his creatures look like they were ingeniously designed. And even beyond that, his genius is the reason why, we think, creatures were engineered to adapt, to adjust their own features so they could better fit and fill the world he made that would be ever-changing. To edify, edification means to build up. That means training. That's why I'm so glad you guys chose to come here for the conference. And then evangelism. I mean, think of the way I felt. You heard my story, I think, last night when I was like plastered on the brick wall out in front of the bar, and I was like a wallflower, and I was watching Kurt, my buddy, witness to these people. And I mean, at that time, if you would have asked me, can you please share the gospel? My gospel presentation would have gone something like this. Well, first of all, you're a sinner. Well, what's sin? Well, sin is when you do what's wrong, and sin started in the garden, which didn't exist, and the first one to sin was Adam, who didn't exist. Bye-bye. And that's where we are as many, many Christians. We don't believe the scripture, and we don't have confidence to even share the gospel. And so by bringing back the reality of the origin of sin and the origin of God's grace, Noah found grace in the eyes of God, Genesis 6. The origin of faith, Genesis 15:6. And Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So our right standing with God from Genesis to Revelation comes not from us trying to be good enough. It comes from us humbly saying, I can't do it. Please help me. And as soon as we believe, he does all the work of rescuing us and saving us. And that's the message of the gospel. And it's right there in Genesis. So now I have more confidence in evangelism, and I'm happy to go on campuses sometimes, as we do, and witness and share the good news of what Jesus has done for me and for you. And if someone says, but what about the dinosaurs? They disprove your silly little Bible. And I'll say, 2 magic questions. What do you mean by that? Like I could say, what do you mean by Bible? Or if they say, there's no such thing as God, I will say, what do you mean by God? And because that puts all the pressure on them to define the terms that they're using and takes all the pressure off of me. And then the second magic question I use in the street, in conversations, even with my wife. Sometimes I have a disagreement with her. Really, she's the one disagreeing with me, though. That's the heart of the problem. But when there's a disagreement, I'll say, what do you mean by that? And ask for clarification so she knows I care about what she thinks and I love her. And then I'll say, what led you to that conclusion? And so so you're saying that the Bible's wrong because of X. Well, what led you to conclude X? And so that's where we go with these conversations. For example, I had a guy tell me once, I heard what you said, Dr. Thomas, about dinosaurs and that they were on the ark, some about the dinosaurs, but I don't believe that at all. I don't think dinosaurs could have been on the ark. I think dinosaurs all died off in a time before Genesis and before the ark. And I said, what led you to that conclusion? And he said, well, dinosaur bodies, their anatomy that we know from their fossils was all messed up. Is all misshapen, and the bones didn't fit together very well. And I said, what led you to that conclusion? I didn't use that exact phrase, but something like that to mix it up. Where did you learn about that? That kind of question. And he said, well, there's a website. So I said, okay, so the interweb, the fount of all knowledge. You do know that anyone writes anything on the interweb. But anyway, so I looked up his website, and it was, it was pretty trashy in terms of bad science, making stuff up. And so I thought I'd look into it more, and I investigated dinosaur anatomy and found evidence of not trashy design, but clever design. Not non-design, but really, really well done. For example, here is a sauropod called, and we're going to say the dinosaur names this afternoon, and this is, say it, Diplodocus. Diplodocus. It's my favorite dino, so I do have favorites of these things. And I had to take several pictures standing in one spot because the thing was so big that I couldn't get it on frame. This is at the Denver Museum. And little bitty head. By the way, that's a weight-saving feature. I mean, whoever engineered this creature faced the same problem, a cantilevered boom, had to make a cantilevered boom, that an engineer faces when they make airplane wings. You got to have these wings out there and supported. So they have to be what? Strong, but not too heavy. Strong, but lightweight. So one of the engineering feats that this engineer did was make that head really tiny. Can you imagine a T-Rex head stuck out on the end of that neck? Boom. He'd be eating worms, and then he'd be gone. So it all fits together just right. And the neck vertebrae, it got less and less dense the further from the body trunk, closer to the head, until the last few vertebrae, right before the head, they were the density of modern styrofoam. Lots of air spaces, both inside the neck bones, the vertebrae, and lots of hollowed out spaces to save weight. Raised ridges, though, right where you need the most support. And we also see design, a clever design in the hip structure with arches. So there's the hip right above the back legs, and there's the arch on the top. In fact, his whole body, from front legs to back legs, is another arch. That's how we support. Weight is by suspending an arch over pillars. And it reminds me of these ancient arches supported on pillars that support an aqueduct. So this is a Roman-era aqueduct, still around today, and if you look really close, you could see teeny tiny people walking back and forth on it. What a feat of Roman engineering. And it was probably the same aqueduct, because this is near Ephesus, that Paul saw 2,000 years ago. And yet, we look at that. Do we ever say, see that river there? The river eroded those arches, right? Natural processes crafted these arches. Well, that's what we say about the dinosaurs and their arches and their clever designs. Should not be. We should feel confident that everyone clearly sees the design, and that if they don't see it, it's because they are suppressing that truth in unrighteousness, because they want to do the bad things that they feel like they want to do. That seems to lie at the heart of a lot of this. Well, anyway, imagine this bridge being able to pick up those pillars and walk around. And that's what dinosaurs were. They were mobile arches, like walking around. And there's those lightweight vertebrae. Reminds me of the clever design in my bicycle. We don't use a solid chain ring because it would be what? Unnecessarily heavy. And it would actually be weaker. So by having a chain ring with holes and gaps in the metal, it actually strengthens it and makes it a lot lighter weight. Same with the tubes. We use tubes to make bicycles instead of solid bars. And dinosaurs actually had both. Some bones were more solid, others were what we call in the world of paleontology, pneumatized, which starts with the letter P. Go figure. I saw this sign at the Field Museum in Chicago, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. They actually put this on the sign. The evolutionist sign maker, sauropods were engineered for size. You know what they see? You know what's clearly seen in these sauropods? Engineering. Now, when it comes to everything else, when we see engineering, we immediately and rightly infer an engineer. Just like Pastor Michael said, see a painting? Must have been a painter. See an engine? Must have been an engineer. Same thing here. They see it. Now, if I were to ask the person who wrote the script for this sign who was the engineer, how do you think they might answer? Yeah, nature, natural processes, time, chance, death of the unfit, natural selection. So all these nature is the designer and the engineer. And what are we doing when we buy into that philosophy? We're worshiping and serving the creature rather than the creator. The creator deserves the credit, not nature, and he is the legitimate answer to the question of where these things came from. How did you get clever design? By a clever designer. I mean, it's simple, and we should all go with it, but we live in a culture that denies and suppresses that idea, which is why we're having a creation conference. Talk about taking design to the next level. Here I am, back when I was handsome, holding a dinosaur egg, hadrosaur egg from China, no longer legal to get them, phooey. But this is a juvenile hadrosaur out in front of my office there at the Institute for Creation Research in Dallas. So that hadrosaur came from an egg about this big. Now imagine crafting a device that hatches out of an egg, takes materials from its environment to build its own body, and it grows, and then it makes a copy of itself. And you assemble all the parts, and you release it, and it just does this for generation after generation. Has anyone ever done that? No. It would require an engineering level that's just beyond what we've ever been able to achieve. I mean, it would be immense. And yet that's what these dinosaurs did and what they were. It would be like the kids say, I'm ready for a cell phone, Mom. I want a cell phone. And you say, okay, we'll get you a cell phone. Honey, and then Mom gets the husband, and we get our 2 cell phones. Okay, we're going to put our cell phones in the drawer, and let's let them have happy time in the drawer. And then we open the drawer. Look, a week later, it's a baby cell phone. And then Daddy gets his phone back, and the little cell phone grows, and it takes silicon from its environment, silicon dioxide to make more glass for the screen, and it builds in carbon to make the back, and so it grows and grows. Is that how it works? No, but that's how it worked back then. That's how it worked, and still today, of course, with creatures that reproduce according to their kinds. Clever, clever design, unparalleled. So all along we should have been saying, and God made. I had one guy say, Satan made. Guys, Satan just makes messes. He takes what God has done and screws it up. He doesn't make out of nothing like only God can. Creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. God made the beasts of the earth, and if anything qualifies as a beast of the earth, I would say dinosaurs do, according to their kinds. How many kinds of dinosaurs were there? Based on their anatomy, think about like the Triceratops. You've heard of that, right? 3 horns, tri. So 2 brow horns, 1 little nose horn, Triceratops. But it's got a tank-like body with a super short neck, 1 vertebra, and the neck had a ball and socket joint, just like a trailer hitch. The heaviest head of any animal ever made, 2,000 pounds back when it was fleshed out, we estimate. And anyway, tank-like body with a head frill. But some of these ceratopsians had no horns. Some had horns all around the frill. Some had no horns around that frill. Some were small, actually the size of a big dog, and others were Triceratops, which was huge. Torosaurus was really big, had a huge frill with big holes in it, which may have been like a really old grandpa Triceratops. Some of these things may have extra names added to them, because if you name it, you get funding. So you look at that and you go, okay, all these have a similar basic body plan. We call them the ceratopsians. Triceratops is just one variety of this created kind. So when you do that with all the dinosaurs, you end up with, even though there are 600 or so species names, there's only about 70 basic kinds. So how much room would 70 dinosaurs take up on Noah's Ark? Well, the answer to that depends on how big was Noah's Ark. So the smallest it could have been is 40 feet tall, and the 70 dinosaurs, it had 3 decks, says Genesis 6. God told Noah, make 3 decks in the ark. So all the dinosaurs, all 70, would have fit in just one corner of one of those 3 decks, leaving plenty of space for mammals and reptiles, and the mammal-like reptiles, which are also extinct, which are a totally separate kind, and etc. And all the birds, lots and lots of birds, and extra room to spare, according to our estimates and calculations. So that's what I think happens next. So cleverly designed first, but then the flood came 1,656 years after creation, according to the Genesis chapter 5 chronogenealogy there in our Bibles. And I believe it. So they suffered catastrophic death after they were cleverly designed, 1,656 years after. What do I mean by catastrophic death? Well, as an illustration of the catastrophe that I think characterizes the formation of these fossils, we're looking at, if you want to say it, Camarasaurus. Some of you want to say it. I appreciate you. This is on display at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. So it's just really amazing because it shows the creature in situation, or what we call in situ, and with the rock matrix around it, as though the way they found it. Well, scientists were looking at this, even though it's been on display for a while, and they thought to themselves, its neck is arched back, which is like really common with creatures that had long necks. So that's an evidence of catastrophe. And then its chin is bent down. And they were really curious about you see how his chin is bent down? It's like, is this a normal posture? Did he normally walk around like this all the time? And so they analyzed this, they analyzed that, and they finally came up with a conclusion. And here's what they wrote. And there's my photo of the close-up of the head, so you can see the neck sort of bent down like that. And they said this about it. The post-mortem dorsiflexion disarticulated the zygapophyses such that it was preserved in a pose that was unlikely attainable in life. And I read that, and I was like, that doesn't tell me anything. Everyone knows that. Like, duh. And then I had to look up all the words in the dictionary. And so after it died, his neck broke. Why didn't you just say that, So catastrophic. After it died, his neck, something's ripping his head off. And certainly, when you find sauropods, the vast majority are just a single bone, so the whole carcass has been disarticulated. And sometimes those single bones have been broken many times. But most often, the legs are gone, the back of the tail is gone, and the head is gone. And you just get this spine and a trunk together. But in rare cases, the head is still with the carcass. And so that's catastrophic death. We even see it with small dinosaurs, like, say, this one, Compsognathus. Please, you came to the conference. You chose to come here and participate, so you're going to have to participate. It's like this, Compsognathus. Easy, see? It was a turkey-sized dinosaur. And the National Geographic family book on dinosaurs says this about it. Compsognathus lived, red flag. How do you know anything about how it lived? Were you there? We might know something about how it died because we see its carcass buried. Anyway, we should question what we read and think about it. Lived close to the shore of a calm lake. Have you ever seen a calm lake? Have you ever seen any lake? You guys are so responsive, it's amazing. You have seen a lake, okay, so maybe you've seen a calm lake. And it says this, after death, the animal's body sank to the bottom. Even though he was on the shore, apparently he got to the middle and sank to the bottom of the lake. Now, notice, what tense is the verb sank? Past tense. Sank in the past. As soon as we read museum signs that have past tense, red flag. We are now going from science, where it's repeatable, observable, measurable, to history, and we're actually telling stories. This is now storytelling, kids. Based on what? Based on what we want to believe. Because it makes no sense when we think about the bottom of today's lakes. The story says this, the calm waters ensured that the bones were not broken up before the process of fossilization could begin. Is the process of fossilization happening in today's calm lakes? Negative. What happens to a fish when it dies, or a turtle when it dies, or a frog when it dies in today's calm lakes? Yeah, it gets eaten. Fish dies, turtle food. Scavenged. And what doesn't get scavenged rots. And there are no fossils forming in calm lakes or turbulent lakes or the ocean floor or anywhere. You dig around the ocean floor, what do you find? Sand, clams, starfish, worms. It's alive or it's sand. Even a whale carcass of the seafloor, 90-foot-long whale. All of its bones get completely recycled in just a few years. And there are bone-eating animals specially designed and cleverly designed just to eat bone. They have drill mechanisms. They drill into the bone and eat it. And that whole whale carcass is gone, not turning into fossils. So fossils happen nowhere today, but they happened everywhere in the past. I'm starting to think that these fossils, even of this Compsognathus, formed in Noah's flood, catastrophically, not calmly, like this silly story suggests. Here's actual fossils of Compsognathid-type dinosaurs. The one on the left is from Europe, and you see its neck is also arched back. The one on the right is from Asia, and its neck is really arched back. And because it's from a different place, they had to give it a different name, even though the anatomies are identical. So the one on the right is fun to say, Sinosauropteryx. Hey, good job. And as we can see clearly, class, the calm waters calmly ensured that the head would be smashed against its pelvis. This is not calm. This is catastrophic to the max, and it's worldwide. Well, I was at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana, and they've got this one on display, again with a neck arched back. And they're saying, an agonizing death, the signage accompanying this fossil. And I thought, they got it right. Finally, they're not talking about calm, placid death. They're talking about the agony and the catastrophe, which is what it really was. And then I read the fine print, and it said it was choking. This is a choking posture, so they did an experiment with chickens and drowning them, and then they necks arched back. Okay, so that's a choking posture. But if you have all these birds and dinosaurs, anything with a long neck in the fossil record, it's almost always necks arched back. If you have the cause of the neck arched back, called the opistotonic posture, if you have the cause that they're drowning in muddy water, then you would have to say, well, these drowned in muddy water on this continent, they drowned in muddy water on that continent, and then all the continents, because all the continents have dinosaur fossils on them, that means the whole earth was covered with muddy water. That's a little bit too biblical. A little bit too biblical for some of us. And so the fine print on this says it was probably choking because a predatory dinosaur was clamped on its neck. Do you see the predatory dinosaur? They pulled this out of outer space, this predatory dinosaur. I think it was choking on the mud that surrounds it. But I'm just a creation scientist. Okay, let's go look at Sue, the nickname for this, the most popular single dinosaur specimen on the planet, on display at the Field Museum in Chicago, nicknamed after the discoverer, Miss Sue Hendrickson. And on the top, we have Sue replica with all the bones put into life position. Done really well, in my opinion, really well, a lot of work. And on the bottom, we have the actual head of Sue in a glass case so we can genuflect and so we can inspect and appreciate the real Sue. Now, notice the difference? A couple of differences. Do you see the smushed nose in the real Sue that they straightened out? I need to hear your heads rattle. Okay. And then there's a little broken, does this show up? So the little broken nose right there, and then the nose is not broken here. Now these two people are reading the sign that describes what's going on with the broken nose. And they're reading it with a straight face, and I don't know how, because here's what the sign says. And we traded places, and I started reading the sign, and it says this, crushed nose, okay? When Sue was found, her, probably was a male, we don't even know the gender, its pelvis, that's down here, was resting on top of her snout. So this is pretzeled and upside down. That may sound odd. Why, yes, it does. But discovering a theropod dinosaur in this death pose is surprisingly common. Okay, that just makes it really odd, because it's odd everywhere you find it. This pose may be caused by, and I'm literally, LOL, I'm on the floor laughing, muscle spasms! You gotta be kidding me. And the people were like just backing away. I was like, you just read this with a straight face? Are you kidding me? Anyway, yeah, it does make some sense, because whenever I have muscle spasms, my pelvis smashes my nose, and I have to go to the chiropractor. It's a whole thing. I hate it when that happens. But I'm looking at all these T-Rexes at these different museums around the nation, Hill City, South Dakota, and whatnot, and wherever. And this is, 6 tons of I can go anywhere. It's a meat bulldozer. And whatever overwhelmed it was moving faster than he could run or swim. Otherwise, he would have gotten out of the way. And it was moving with more force than his body could generate. Otherwise, he could just dig his way out. So he was completely overwhelmed. And then his body parts were were torn apart and then spread out like a pancake over hundreds of square miles, and on many continents. The similar type of dinosaur, a tyrannosaurid, which some were tall, some were short. Some had bigger teeth, some had smaller teeth. But anyway, this is a catastrophic scene, and it happened everywhere globally. And it's exactly what I would expect if Noah's flood really happened. I think these are flood fossils. I really do. These are flood fossils, catastrophically buried in deep mud before they could get scavenged, too deep so that scavengers couldn't even get down to it. And then soon after dried out so that their bones wouldn't rot under the wet mud. The wet mud dried out, it lithified or solidified into rock. And what does the Bible say? The first 150 days, water's rising, and then Genesis 8:3, waters are sloshing back and forth, assuaging, King James word. And then they finally off the surface of the earth. And then 371 days after the flood started, now we have newly shaped continents, and the waters have finally slid into now deeper ocean basins, and it's drying out all within a year. So that's how we get billions of dead things buried in rock layers that were laid down by water all over the earth. That's what we find. And the Bible said this all along. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole Middle East. Under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth. So people say, you can't believe that stupid, silly Bible, because the high hills would have included the Himalayas, and those are miles up in the air. And there's not enough water. Where'd you get all the water to cover the Himalayas? Read the text. The waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth. Well, what's the earth? It's the earth that existed in the pre-flood world. The earth which the original authors were familiar. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah. It's the earth that existed back then. Before those mountains even were formed. The mountains formed during the flood, during the latter half of the flood even, when the continents slid apart and smashed into one another, buckling up these mountains as waters were coming off. So it's those high hills that were completely covered. Okay, so we have plenty of water. If you flattened out all the continents to sea level or to one level, then and today's water level in today's oceans and lakes, if you added that all up, it would be you'd have a globe that was 2 miles deep underwater. So our continents stick up out of a lot of water. In fact, you can position the globe on Google Earth, looking out at the Pacific, to where you can see no land from a particular vantage. There's a lot of water, guys. Plenty of water. Well, I wish I knew this clue. No one told me about these clashes with dragons. I mean, I heard the word dragons, of course, growing up, but I always understood them as fiction. But the word is actually in the King James Bible, King James Version. And why? Why would those 1611 translators use the word dragon? And some say, maybe there's a dinosaur described in the Bible. Actually, I'm one of those someones who say that. But then, if that's the case, why doesn't the Bible say dinosaur? Well, 1611 is before 1842, which is when the word dinosaur was invented by Sir Richard Owen in England. So the word dragon was around beforehand. What did they use that word for in their common language, dragon? So sometimes they used it to refer to fancy, just like today. We have imaginary dragons. But other times they used it to describe what looked like, I'll just show you. Here's one. This is really, really old. Some of the oldest artifacts, human artifacts that we know of. And it's from Uruk in the Middle East, ancient Samaria. And so it's a cylinder seal, and they would take this cylinder and roll it out on a piece of clay, and then it would give this design, so you didn't have to carve the design. You just carve it once and then roll it, and you get a lot of decorations that way. Bake the clay. So what these archaeologists did before they posted this on display at the Louvre in Paris is they took the the ancient cylinder seal, rolled it on a piece of modern clay, baked it, and so give an example of what this thing would have done. And we see regular birds, but also these creatures with long necks, long tails, legs that go down beneath the body as opposed to sprawling, okay? You guys ready to sprawl? Let's stand up and sprawl. You liked the standing up last time, I heard. So we're going to do it again if you want. If not, just, you'll be uncool. Okay? So we're going to do the lizard walk, but we're going to walk in place, so it'll be fun. And to be a lizard or a crocodile or even a turtle, the upper limb bone goes out, then the lower limb bone goes down toward the earth. So we're like this, and our legs out and then down, sort of. Now to walk, we're walking that way because the ground is now in front of us, and we have to keep that straddling pose, and then we just waddle as we walk. Go ahead, waddle. You guys look so silly. It's awesome. That is greatness. Now, dinosaurs and humans, legs beneath, straight beneath. So sauropods walking like this, legs beneath. And part of that is some of the big dinosaurs, like the sauropods, they had to support so much weight that if they had this straddle position or posture, they'd be dragging their bellies. You've got to get something up underneath that, all that weight. So excellent job. Please congratulate yourselves with a little round of applause. So when we look at these artifacts, we're looking for that feature. Is it reptilian, and are the legs underneath the body to support that weight? And we see that there. We also see it here. And this is thousands of miles away from Sumeria, and it's in the north of England at Carlisle Cathedral. So yeah, when we went there to go see it, I couldn't find it anywhere. I was told that there's Bishop Bell's tomb, and it was part of his tomb, his monument for this bishop. And I said, that's it, I can't find it. Let's just leave, because I give up too easy. And my wife said, let's ask the rector. That's what they call their pastors, the rector. And so the rector said, well, I will roll up the carpet, the rug, for you so you could see the tomb. But he said this, there are no dinosaurs here. So I said, yes, sir, and I took my pictures. My picture turned out blurry, so I had to borrow this one. But anyway, it's long tails, long necks intertwined. Now, it's rubbed out from centuries of foot traffic. Pastor, are you ready? They're going to bury you in the aisle, then walk on you for centuries. You ready? He's ready to go for that. That's why it's under a rug now. But and then legs are underneath the body there. So same posture, same behavior even. And now I found a detail. I didn't find it. Some friends of mine found it and pointed it out to me. The one on the left has tail spikes out on the end of that tail. And if you look really close, you can count 4 tail spikes. Now, the question we ask is there an actual sauropod with tail spikes at all? There's 2 of them. One of them is called, and if you want to say it, Shunosaurus. Yeah, they found it in the 1990s, discovered. And how many spikes were on the Shunosaurus tail? Count them. So it really is a good match anatomically between this carving in brass from the 1400s and what we only learned about in 1990s. Maybe they had some sort of information about this thing still alive, maybe in some swamps that had not yet been drained, something like that. It's a possibility we want to consider before we just dismiss it. Okay, this is the Narmer palette, and it says, look, I'm Pharaoh, and I'm the biggest, baddest dude on the planet. And to prove it, I'm going to make a monument to my greatness. And I'm so great that I have my guys lasso down and wrestle the biggest animals that we know of with long necks intertwined and legs that go beneath the body and tails that can't even fit on perhaps on the monument. Anyway, those long necks look pretty weird unless we consider them as some sort of reflection, because, I mean, it's actual people and actual bulls that we can recognize, stylized, of course, but possible reflections of animals that they knew. And, you know, there's a Bible word, behemoth. Have you heard of that one? Job's behemoth in Job chapter 40, starting in verse 15. But there's a Egyptian word that's the exact same word. It's transliterated from Hebrew into Egyptian, and pimwa is how they would have pronounced it in ancient Egypt. That was a word that they had in their language, pimwa, and it just meant behemoth, and it meant big animal, big animal. Okay, now let's go to the Blois Valley in France, and there's this tapestry in one of the castles, and this is Middle Ages. And there's a spiny-backed with scales creature on the left. It's a swamp scene, by the way, with regular recognizable plants and animals. And then on the right is a little bitty, looks like a baby dinosaur. And it really, so the one on the left doesn't match any fossils that we're aware of. So maybe it's just sort of imaginary. But the one on the right, the little one, the cute little baby dinosaur, you could have him as your pet. And then feed him, and then he would grow up and eat your brother. Perfect. But it looks exactly like Maiasaura, and we have hundreds of those at least buried in North America. Now, let's go to Italy. And in Italy, the Nile mosaic of Palestrina. So the Nile is North Africa. Mosaic means little pieces of tile that they arrange into a picture, a pattern. And Palestrina is the place in Italy where this was once a little shrine. And they were apparently fascinated with what goes on in North Africa, where the mouth of the Nile met the Mediterranean Sea. And there's all kinds of scenes happening here. There's hunting scenes and everything else. And there's familiar animals, but there's also depictions. And by the way, this is 100 BC. So this would have been 100 years old by the time Jesus was walking around on earth. So what was alive back then that has since gone extinct? Maybe these kind of creatures. So here's one. It's making the natives restless. It's trying to head back into its cave home. And it's got these big tusks. And it's got a neck that's turning around like this. And actually, we don't know of any dinosaur that it matches the anatomy of, but it does seem to match the anatomy of a particular extinct creature called Gorgonopsid, and it's one of these mammal-like reptiles. So they're all extinct too, as well as the dinosaurs. They weren't mammals, they weren't reptiles, they were their own separate entire category, and they're all gone also. This may have been one of them. So skeptics say, no, dinosaurs died 65 million years ago, so therefore this must have been an alligator or a crocodile. You mean like this crocodile? They knew what they were doing. They did really good art back then. And then let's go to Cambodia, to Ta Prohm, and this was buried in jungle for hundreds of years and then uncovered, and now it's a tourist spot. And we see on this pillar at this temple a stylized lion dude, and there's a water buffalo, and then beneath the water buffalo is a creature with big plates on its back. And so we wonder where they got that idea in the Middle Ages. And then in Barcelona, again in the medieval era, there's a depiction of St. George and the Dragon, which is a story that got repeated throughout the Middle Ages of this saint who slayed a dragon. And it turns out that every book that has pictures of the event, ancient book, and every piece of art from all these different countries, whether it's a carving in stone or whatever it is, a carving in wood in a church or whatever, or even this type of art, which is made of cloth, they had a different dragon for St. George's dragon. And some of those different dragons, even though they were different from one another, they matched what we know from the anatomy of dinosaurs and other extinct reptiles, like this one. And I told you I was going to say it this afternoon, and here it is, Nothosaurus, with those characteristic teeth that go outside the mouth, probably a fishing type of creature. But the shape of the head, the shallow forehead, the shape of the mouth and the neck and the head and the overall relative size of the body relative to the horse and the horseman, all match what we'd expect if this artist was familiar with this creature, which we now know only from Triassic rock layers. So, by the way, the Gorgonopsid and the sauropods would be like Jurassic. So we've got dinosaur lookalikes in ancient art from all these different rock layers. Well, what are we saying about these different rock layers? They don't represent different time periods. They represent different zones where these creatures lived on Earth at the time of the flood. So that's why you have the lowest rocks have sea creatures, sea creatures, sea creatures. Shallow marine, the water's coming up closer to land, so shallow marine, and then swamp creatures, the water's rising higher. It's burying dinosaurs now, and these kinds of things. And then finally, at the uppermost layers, you have the mammals and the camels. And not because they evolved later, but because they got flooded later because they lived higher, okay? That's how we interpret the rock layer. So therefore, we'd expect to see perhaps some of these creatures having lived through the flood, whether they're from this layer down here or these layers up above. And it turns out that clashes with dragons some of them represent, from our ancestors, might represent actual clashes with actual creatures that are now extinct. And I think that is what Job is describing. So here in Job 40, starting in verse 15, God says to Job, "Look now at this metaphor." No, look at this animal, which I made along with you. Okay? I made you people on day what of creation week? Day 6. He made the land animals also on day 6. So I made along with you on day 6. See now his strength is in his hips, and we saw that Diplodocus hip, super tall. By the way, Diplodocus, using its hip and using its tail, it had these extra little bone wedges shaped things, about a third of the length out of it from its hip on its tail, and it could, we suspect, it could plant its tail in the ground like you'd think of planting a tree, and then he could rear up on those front legs and stick his neck up 100 feet like this, a Diplodocus. Point being, he's got super strong hips, and he moves his tail like a cedar. And indeed, when those creatures walked, we see the places on the bones where the muscles would have connected, and there's a little place where it's like a rough spot on the bone, and the muscle would have connected from the tail to the top of the femur here. So when he took a step, it would pull the tail that direction. It's just a little bit. And every time he takes a step, I should get you to participate in this, and he's going to sway his tail with every step. And so that's why you see in the Jurassic World movies, those dinosaurs have these swaying tails. That's based on reconstructions from quality paleontology, and it matches what we see. The breeze flowing through the forest, swaying the cedar tree, something like that. Moves his tail like a cedar. Well, my Bible margin note says, possibly a hippopotamus. So I went to the Dallas Zoo and I looked at the hippo exhibit. And there's the hippo, and he just sits there and sits there. Dude, hippo, get a life. Finally, hippo comes out of the water where they just love to float, because the hippo finally had to do some business, which I wish I could never have seen. Because he takes his little flap-like tail and uses it as a dung distributor device, spraying it all around. Hey, fertilizes the ground really well. But it had sound effects. Nothing about that episode reminded me of a cedar in any way. Not the shape, not the motion, not the smell for sure. So clashes with dragons. And then the last two, dinosaur details. I wish I knew when I was a kid, and I might have been flying straighter sooner with the Lord instead of against him. And that is having to do with collagen decay. But we just had an episode on this, so I'm going to race through it because you guys are already experts. Yes, we found collagen in this T-Rex, and man, there's the skull associated with the soft tissue that was published in 2005. And I found it at the museum, took my picture of it, and I was like, this is the skull, everybody, come see. This is where they found the dinosaur blood vessels. And again, the people are backing away from me, making me so sad. And I already showed you this, but this is from a hadrosaur femur from Canada. Blood vessels again, and again, here's the heart. And wow, this soft, still flexible tissue. This was published way back in 2022 in a open access journal, MDPI Biology. And you could see on the top, modern crocodile, and there's a crocodile-like creature buried as a fossil called, say it, Thoracosaurus, from New Jersey. Here's from New Jersey, and blood vessels coming out of that fossil reptile. Well, here's some of what we do, and I showed you some of this. This is a hadrosaur, and you could see the color change taking place, gold to blue. That's where we see collagen using this special microscopical technique. You can see where it stays lavender. Those are areas that our interpretation is those are areas where there is no longer any collagen left. So we're continuing to collect images, and we're working on trying to publish these in a journal, in several journals, so we can have even more ways to characterize and describe collagen in bone. And so it looks recently made, guys. And here's what Jesus said, Mark 10:6, but billions of years after the Big Bang beginning, God made them male and female. Oh, I misread it. I am so sorry. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. So right there at the beginning, you got people available to hear and comprehend God's, his handiwork. And Jesus quoted Genesis as though it was history, and we should too. And we have science to back it up now. Well, there's a whole new realm of research I've been doing with radiocarbon, so I'm just going to talk about this really quick, and then I wish I knew about this, because radiocarbon has a shorter shelf life even than collagen does. The collagen egg timer takes, in theory, hundreds of thousands of years under ideal conditions before it goes ding, no collagen left. But radiocarbon, it's only 100,000 max, actually less than that. But let's just take the max possible we can imagine in theory based on its measured decay rate, 5,730 year-long half-life. Don't know what that means, look it up. We just need the shelf life to make an argument, 100,000 years max. So if we find radiocarbon in a fossil, we can say that fossil was deposited fewer than, how many years ago? Fewer than 100,000. Now the traditional or mainstream age assignments for all these fossils are in the order of tens of millions of years. But the flood interpretation is 4,400 years ago. So is 4,400 or millions fewer than 100,000? It's the 4,400. That's the model that we're going to say works best if we find radiocarbon, as we did in this tail vertebra, caudal vertebra of a hadrosaur, as we did in a Triceratops brow horn core. We used 3 different labs, 4 different samples, spent several thousand of our donors' monies on getting these results, and we published them in the journals that we can find that will accept the kind of things we do. But the secular mainstream community says carbon dating dinosaur bones, that's a total waste of time, because those bones have been underground for tens of millions of years, and any radiocarbon you find in it is going to be a contamination. So they invoke contamination without even investigating it, because it has to be contamination, because the 70 million years is a fact. And we're saying, let's let the data determine which worldview explains what we see. So we see fresh-looking collagen, and we also see fresh-looking radiocarbon still ticking away, turning itself into nitrogen spontaneously in a relatively short time. And even Diplodocus, with this dark-colored bone, stained from minerals from outside. We found radiocarbon in it, and What's this one called? Who knows it? Steg. This is a steg. So we found some in steg bone. Ooh, we thought maybe this is just a North American phenomenon, so we got a piece of, say it, Psittacosaurus. Starts with the letter P, which is fun. And we found radiocarbon in this oriental bone. But this is consistent with what our researchers have been finding for a long time. Not just ICR researchers, but radiocarbon dating laboratories are looking for some sort of earth material that has carbon in it, but no radiocarbon in it. And in their worldview, these coals are 200 plus million years old. So the radiocarbon should be long gone. And they keep finding radiocarbon in their coal samples. So they're having a hard time finding a sample blank that they can use to balance their instrumentation. And so we did that. We did a project where we carefully collected coal samples and we retested them, and sure enough, measurable amounts of radiocarbon in the coals. And we were the first ones to do it with diamonds. So we collected diamonds from Africa, and we destroyed them in the name of science. And we found radiocarbon even in diamonds. I was at the jewelry store yesterday, and I overheard the lady behind the counter talking to a customer, and the customer was asking, "What is a lab manufactured diamond? What's that?" And so the lady behind the counter said, "Well, that means they make diamonds in a lab really fast. But the natural diamonds are those that have been forming for 3 billion years." So she's using the age as a definition, all the while knowing that diamonds can form fast. You just need the right conditions. In fact, we don't know of any conditions whereby diamonds can form slowly, but we do know conditions where diamonds can form fast. Same with coal. You can make coal in a week, just heat and pressure. You can make a fossil in a couple weeks. That's a whole different story. Anyways, we found it, and so another group of authors got really upset that we found radiocarbon in any diamond, so they decided to test their own diamonds. They published their results, this secular group, in 2007, right after we published ours. And they said, "We found radiocarbon in our diamonds, but it has to be contamination." But they just reasoned in a circle. This is circular reasoning coming right back, saying, because these diamonds are 3 billion years old, and we found radiocarbon in them, therefore the radiocarbon must have been a recent addition. Like, how is that going to get incorporated into the structure of a diamond? Diamond is pure carbon in a lattice structure. So anyway, we have young-looking earth features, earth materials, and we have a young-looking earth. And we have science that supports Scripture. And we have this passage which really highlights the whole reason for this conference. So glad you came. "For if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings," is Moses responsible for Genesis? Yeah, he's responsible for Genesis. And what are in his writings? Creation and the flood. If you don't believe creation, it's going to be tough to believe in Jesus. If you don't believe the flood, which was a worldwide judgment, it's going to be tough to believe in Jesus, who promises he will come back to the world and judge it again. So by going back and saying we have science to support the creation and the flood, therefore Genesis got it right, now we can say with more confidence than ever, Jesus is coming back. He does love each of us, and he wants to rescue each of us from this future coming judgment, and you can believe my words. You can believe the words of the Lord Jesus. Will you? Will you believe his words? Will you defend his words? Will you equip yourselves to be better defenders of his words and better reconcilers of a sinful world with a holy God through his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ? Well, I've told you about these resources already, so I'll just let them. Boy, these Dinosaurs for Kids, the kids' books, have been fun to make and watch. We had a Sunday school teacher say, "I was reading this to my kids in class today, and I never knew that about dinosaurs. They have blood vessels in them?" So the kids' book is our way of educating adults who work with kids.